But we'll go ahead and take a trip out onto the West Coast now because we have a 7:30 matchup that's going to take place on ABC. A little bit of that staggered start action as we get into the late night. Because the next bowl game that we have on tap is that Las Vegas Bowl. It's presented by SRS Distribution. Now, this bowl game pits Utah and Northwestern, and it's kind of the opposite in terms of expectations. Northwestern was expected to be terrible this year. We got to say it how it is. After their head coach was fired, Northwestern was predicted by many people to be one of the worst Power 5 teams in America. The Colorado before Deion Sanders, if you look at it from that lens. It was so bad that I remember very early in the season, Northwestern was an underdog to UTEP. Yeah, I'm going to say that real slow. Make sure y'all heard me carefully. There was a time this season where UTEP was an actual betting favorite over Northwestern. That's what Vegas had, not what I had, but that's what Vegas had. Crazy stuff out there, for sure. But then Northwestern, they just find ways to win. And they have. That's why they're 7-5. That's why they're here in a bowl game. They're much better than what they've been able to be predicted to go. And I'm actually kind of surprised that David Braun didn't get more love for the coaching job that he's been able to do. Now, on the opposite side, for Utah, you could argue that this has been a little bit of a lost year. Utah has these expectations of possibly competing for a college football playoff spot. Utah has these expectations to compete for a Pac-12 championship. Neither of those things happen, and a big reason for that, in my opinion, was because they didn't have their leader on offense, Cam Rising. He'll be back next year, but for the sake of this particular bowl game, not going to happen. So, in spite of all that, in spite of Northwestern trending in a positive direction and Utah being in the negative direction, it seems like, still Utah is favored. Well, let's go ahead and see the why in terms of why Utah is favored over Northwestern. We'll talk about the underdogs here and talk about what the underdogs could and will need to do in order to have a chance to win this Las Vegas Bowl game, even though they are underdogs. Because for Northwestern, like I said, this could have been another lost year. Because what's been kind of forgotten was just the black cloud that was over based off of the hazing investigation that happened with Pat Fitzgerald and all that other stuff. But David Braun has stepped in. He was on in the same staff as Pat Fitzgerald. He's actually steadied the ship. It's actually really inspiring to see what he's been able to accomplish, even with everything that's been happening around this program in the previous offseason. The turnovers have stopped. The defensive front actually played at a higher level, particularly against the run, and they pulled off some shockers. They had a massive comeback against Minnesota. They stunned Maryland. Shoot, they even pushed the Iowa Hawkeyes to the brink. And that's a team that had no business being in the Big Ten championship. I am happy that the Big Ten is getting rid of divisions after this year. At the same time, though, Iowa did end up winning Big Ten West for all the memes that came from it. And then they also had this run of wins against Wisconsin, Purdue, Illinois. There might be a whole slew of problems, and it's going to take Utah messing up, right? This is more about Utah shooting itself in the foot, a requisite a number of times, more so than Northwestern coming out and winning this game from Utah. But Northwestern can also give itself a shot if their running game is merely functional. They're a team that's 6-1 when they're running for 90 yards or more. Because what Northwestern has is they do have a veteran quarterback in Ben Bryant, who's had experience starting at Eastern Michigan and Cincinnati as well. He knows how to start. He's played a lot of college football. So they have a quarterback back there that is not going to be the reason why the team loses very often. Also, the Utes have very little to no downfield passing game. And like Northwestern, they have to run the ball to win. They went 2-4 when running for over 120 yards, but they were Utah's undefeated when running for 220 or more. It's very feast or famine when it comes to that Ute offense. Northwestern has allowed 220 rushing yards just 3 times. So again, you contain Utah and with their front seven, you have a chance. But this could be one of those more defensive minded games because Utah's defensive front has the ability to take over right away. And for Utah to win, they got to get an advantage on Northwestern's offensive line immediately. While the Northwestern offensive line isn't nearly as bad as last year, it's still awful in pass protection. And it also doesn't generate a steady push for their ground attack. They're 7-5 for a reason. They're inconsistent offensively, like many teams in the Big Ten West. Utah will also make it very difficult for Northwestern to run the ball. They are fourth in the nation against the run, and they did this playing in a very good Pac-12 conference. We have as the second best league in the nation this year. And it also helps you have a solid pass rush coming from several spots. And I mean, that's Utah football in a nutshell. The defense is always going to be great. Coach Whittingham, he has a very good vision of what Utah football is all about. It's a defensive-minded program. It shows on Saturdays. The bigger issue for Northwestern, though, is going to be control. This isn't a fast attack, but it does prefer to work with a little bit of pace. On the flip side of that, though, Utah is number one in the country when it comes to time possession, and that's because of a defense that's amazing at holding up on third downs. So Utah, for all that it's worth, even without its primary offensive weapons, they also know how to go about controlling and dictating how the game is going to be played. So while Northwestern has been able to pull off some rallies in Minnesota and a near comeback against Iowa, overall, it's not built to mount a big comeback against a top defense. It's also not going to grind out long time consuming drives. So if you're Utah, all you got to do is make sure that your ground game is going fine. You get off to a solid start and you'll be fine. And because of that, I think Utah is in a good spot here. I do think Utah wins this game, and Utah is going to cover in this particular game as well. But do want to shout out the head coach of Northwestern, David Braun. He's done a very good job this year. This could have been a disaster of a football season, but it hasn't. And I think that speaks a lot to what David Braun's trying to do. Hopefully he can build on this going into 2024 with the Big Ten only getting tougher with those Pac-12 additions.